és kedves jó napot kívánok mindenkinek. Először hadd kezdjem azzal, hogy köszönetet adjak a Budapest Center for Mass Atrocity Prevention and for the opportunity to speak to you today and hopefully to have discussion. Because I hope I am not just going to speak, but I'm also going to listen to your questions and be able to answer them. On mass atrocity prevention, in practice, gender-based mass atrocity prevention, I'm entitled my intervention as a practical perspective. On August 25th, 1982, during the annual Santa Rosa de Lima festival, members of the Guatemalan military captured a large group of Quechua men. The men were vocal advocates for land rights in the rural northeastern region of Guatemala. Most of these men were later either confirmed killed or were forcibly disappeared. But the violence didn't stop there. Soldiers also went to their hometown, a small place called Sepur Zarco. Over the next several years, the Quechua women of Sepur Zarco were systematically subjected to rape and abuse at the hands of the military. Earlier in the same year, 7,000 miles away, like 12 to 13,000 kilometers away, a new leader was taking charge in Chad. After coming to power, Issa Nabré took immediate action against his political opponents. Villages were attacked, pillaged, and destroyed. Many educated Chadians from the south were arrested. Citizens were routinely executed. Women were raped. Those detained were held in prisons without trial, and most did not survive. Their corpses were left to rot in prison cells. Today, 30 years later, these stories from Guatemala and Chad serve as a sinister example of what happens when the rule of violence is allowed to prevail over the rule of law. And yet, they don't seem so different than the stories we hear about today from almost every part of the world. Like those against the Yazidi population in Iraq, where Yazidi women and girls were abducted and enslaved at the hands of the so-called Islamic State. Or the large-scale murder, rape, and property destruction that is causing hundreds of thousands of Rohingya to flee Myanmar in what the United Nations is beginning to call a case of ethnic cleansing. It's clear from our headlines that the international community is still failing to prevent mass crimes such as sexual and gender-based violence. I will argue two things today. First, that the key to addressing crimes of sexual and gender-based violence in conflict, and indeed any mass atrocity crime, starts with getting the information gathering right. I'm referring to any inquiry, fact-finding, documentation, or investigation. Second, that only credible accountability, meaning accountability based on professionally gathered information, in which survivors believe can create a sense of justice and deterrence that gives affected populations the confidence to replace the rule of violence with the rule of law. And for both of these to happen, one essential element is that the identification, collection, and preservation of information be done by appropriate professionals. To show you what I mean, let's look again at the cases of Guatemala and Chad. In Guatemala, survivors of Sepur Zarco did their best to rebuild their lives. And 25 years after remaining silent, the women of Sepur Zarco were able to speak out. In 2011, 15 indigenous women brought their case before Guatemala's justice system. In order to do so, there was a need to utilize experts in investigating and prosecuting sexual and gender-based violence. With the help of these experts, in February 2016, Guatemalan judges found 2 senior military officers guilty on all charges in the Sepur Zarco case and sentenced them to life in prison. And in Chad, Survivors also decided that they would not let Hissène Habré's brutality go unpunished, even though he had been ousted from power and had fled to Senegal. As the investigations began, it became clear that experts, such as a military analyst and a forensic handwriting expert, were required to demonstrate conclusively that the former dictator bore direct personal responsibility for the crimes that occurred on his watch. In May of 2016, Hissène Habré was convicted of rape, sexual slavery, and ordering killings during his rule. He was also sentenced to life in prison. Both of these cases represent remarkable progress for justice for gender-based crimes. In both countries, there is now acute awareness that those who commit atrocious acts, such as sexual slavery, rape, sexual torture, will not escape the reach of law, no matter how powerful they are. This is a big key to preventing future abuses. But what was it exactly that made progress towards justice possible more than 2 decades after the crimes occurred, especially in the area of sexual and gender-based violence, which has long been considered too difficult for accountability? Most of us will have heard the phrase, rape in war is unfortunate but unavoidable. In both cases, there was a new element to supplement the resolve and determination of survivors to help overcome this discouragement and threats to their lives and the lives of their families. I will come back to this new element in a moment. First, it's important to frame the evolution of international criminal justice in the last 25 years. I like to think of this period as the modern era of international criminal justice, starting with the ad hoc tribunals for Rwanda, the former Yugoslavia, and other tribunals like the Sierra Leone Special Court, including the Rome Statute for the International Criminal Court, innovations such as the International Chambers in national courts, as well as all of the rich practice and jurisprudence that these courts and tribunals have produced. On the human rights side, there has been a more systematic and extensive use of monitoring and fact-finding, especially the Human Rights Commission mandated commissions of inquiry. I believe that in this period, in all the developments in international criminal justice, the most significant advances have been made in addressing accountability for sexual and gender-based violence. There are a number of reasons for this progress. One impetus has been the increase in the speed and breadth of information now available about sexual and gender-based violence, thanks to the growing sophistication of human rights advocacy, which has helped determine survivor groups to put more pressure on the international community. More recently, there has been political attention on sexual and gender-based crimes from a number of states, and even personal commitments by high-profile individuals, and you probably know who I'm talking about. All of this has brought sexual and gender-based violence in conflict to the world's attention. But the single most important factor in taking sexual and gender-based violence investigations from the fringes to the center of investigating mass atrocities in recent years, and this is the new element that I'm referring to, is the ready availability of experienced professionals who are also specifically trained in working under international legal and human rights norms and international conditions. Professionals from every part of the world who have the cultural, legal, and sometimes even the linguistic affinity with the place and people where the alleged violations being investigated took place, and that these professionals are available more rapidly than ever before. In just over 8 years, this is a time since my organization, Justice Rapid Response, became operational, we have seen a huge advance in this area. The development of sexual and gender-based violence investigation, even 8 years ago, had to be done in parallel to the main investigation. Today, investigations into mass atrocities that excludes a strong sexual and gender-based crimes component are not taken seriously by the international community. That is a huge advance, and that has occurred in just 8 years. There are significant qualitative benefits to investigations, fact-finding and inquiries carried out by experienced professionals. The information that is identified and gathered, what is kept and how it is preserved, what level of care is exerted to ensure compliance with the do no harm principle, and how the report is written to comply with both the mandate and the needs of the situation, all depend on the expertise of the profession and professionalism of those doing the investigations. If they also have a cultural understanding of the circumstances, so that the investigation takes place under both appropriate legal as well as societal frameworks, just as it would be if the investigation took place under domestic jurisdiction, the benefits further increase exponentially. These considerations are especially true with investigations of sexual and gender-based violence, because these investigators often must conduct an investigation within an investigation to get to the truth about patterns of gender-based violence within a specific context. The professionalism of the experts can also add a variety of positive elements to the prevention agenda. If they come early enough in the phase of a conflict, the activities they document and confirm can serve as an early warning as to what may follow. The presence of experts trained to investigate atrocities can also sometimes prevent and deter more severe infractions. There are circumstances when a clear component of international presence can serve to inhibit certain kinds of violence. Most importantly, an appropriately conducted investigation can convince an affected population that the process is genuine. It is being done for the purpose of finding out what happened and who is responsible. That there are no national or international political agendas at play. That the accountability built on information so gathered, be it criminal accountability or some other form of transitional justice remedy, is credible. That is why, when it comes to strategies for prevention, the contributions of justice processes equipped with professional experts to do the work must not be overlooked. The necessity for credibility is absolutely crucial. In my view, the international community will not make any real progress in living up to its now decades-long promise to end impunity for the worst crimes known to humanity, while we only ask for or try to deliver accountability. We have to go beyond that and go for credible accountability as our goal, because only then can we expect populations affected by recurring cycles of violence to consider giving the rule of law a chance. We must demonstrate that the rule of law actually works, and our first, best, and often only chance to do so is in the fact-finding, inquiries, and investigation phase, in the short windows of political and security opportunities that come about during lulls in conflict. We know that the positive consequences of a community or a country trusting its legal rules are enormous. It means a real opportunity to break recurring cycles of violence that may have been going on for decades. A real break built on looking at and resolving the past, not avoiding it or sweeping it under the carpet like it so often happens in political deals. A break that allows for reconciliation, the reestablishment of conditions for human security, and natural economic activity and investment. Yet the devil is always in the detail, and there is still considerable work left to be done to attain credible accountability for conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence. One of these is that women and girls tend to be most negatively affected in conflicts. With the men away or dead, women's burdens of being both the caregivers and breadwinners, often for extended families, is exacerbated. This, as well as other underlying inequalities, make them particularly vulnerable in times of conflict. One way to reduce this factor in the future is to increase the participation of women in peace processes, accountability, and transitional justice remedies. We know that most substantive participation of women enhances the chances of peace becoming lasting, thus reducing the chances of such violence recurring systematically. Unfortunately, this long-term remedy does not address situations already in conflict, where sexual and gender-based violence continues to be a serious threat. And, as you just heard, not just for women and girls. As many of you know, men and boys are also greatly affected by sexual violence and conflict. We hear less about this because, as poor as the reporting rate is among women and girls, it is much, much worse among men and boys. While we don't have consistent global statistics, we know that during conflict, men are victims of rape, sexual torture, forced nudity, and other acts, especially in situations involving detention. These kinds of crimes were notorious in the Balkans, happened in the detention facilities such as Abu Ghraib, and continue to happen today in places like Syria. It is important for us to remember that sexual and gender-based violence is not about sex. Rape and other acts of sexual violence in conflict are about demonstrating, imposing, and then exercising power over opponents, causing lasting damage, not just to individuals, but also to the existence of communities, demoralizing opposition forces and entire groups by depriving them of a future. In my remarks today, I have to make a case for the importance, not just the importance, the necessity of ensuring that the first vital phase of addressing human rights and international criminal law violations, the fact-finding, the inquiries, the investigations, must be taken absolutely seriously. Not assuming that whoever does the work, whenever they're able to do it, will be enough to muddle through, or that muddling through is enough. Because like a house built on uncertain foundations, accountability based on a less than professional investigation is not likely to be seen as credible, and it will not stand the test of time. We have seen that the acceptance and use of external expert rosters in other areas of international work, such as humanitarian efforts, has worked perfectly well for years. Based on the just-in-time delivery principle that the private sector has been successfully using for decades, these standby rosters of active duty experts with specialized skills and training are available at short notice to respond to man-made or natural crises. I can give you two examples of these operations. They include such operations as PROCAP, which is the Interagency Standing Committee Protection Standby Capacity, and GENCAP, the Interagency Standing Committee Gender Standby Capacity Project. Both of these are standby projects of external experts supporting the international community through the United Nations. We don't have, and we absolutely need, a similar level of acceptance of this kind of external expert capacity on relations and issues related to human rights and core international crimes, crimes such as genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. A good start has been made with my organization, Justice Rapid Response, but we need a lot more. Since 2009, we have gradually gained acceptance as the go-to facility for investigative expertise for these violations, and we've already assisted more than 130 investigations and inquiries. We have a roster of more than 650 professionals, representing 50 professional categories of expertise from 110 countries around the world, 55% of whom are women. This means that whenever an investigation into atrocities like Ramallah or Chad require highly specialized expertise, we are able to provide the right expert to go to the right place at the right time. The challenge is that the international community needs to be able to better absorb expertise in the areas of human rights and international criminal justice. In closing, what I would like you, ladies and gentlemen, to take with you from this presentation, and please to consider, is that having and making professional experts available on request is important, even vital, but it's not enough. The vision I would like you to consider is a world where, whenever there is an opportunity to investigate the worst crimes known to humanity, those responsible for doing that investigation will automatically think about using the right expert in the right place at the right time. Experts like the experts that I have just talked to you about. Because when this becomes automatic, we will have attained the necessary solid foundation for credible accountability and finally start to prevent, not just respond to, mass atrocity crimes such as sexual and gender-based violence and conflict. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to your questions.